Never before has modern Hollywood been so much about infusing political messaging and progressive ideas into storytelling. At the same time, never before has there been such an overwhelming reliance on pre-existing intellectual properties, remakes, and adaptations from yesteryear. Therefore, Hollywood is socially progressive, but creatively reactionary. And the schism between those two things is ever widening. That is the failure of modern Hollywood. And the latest iteration of this bullshit? Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. I mean, officially just Snow White, but in reality Snow White and newly named magical creatures, because apparently Peter Dinklage thought the idea of dwarves in a new version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves would be a kind of lame throwback, perpetuating negative stereotypes and the limitations placed on dwarf actors. Firstly, there is a distinction between little people in the actual world and dwarves as fantastical characters like elves from folklore. Second, the dwarves in the original film are framed as endearing, often comical, with mild slapstick and lighter elements, and in the wider realm of Disney characters that places them closer to the commonality of characters, not as some patronized otherness. In fact, on balance, the characters are positive, industrious, morally centered, and have a fair degree of agency to make good moral choices. They are not bad guys, or comic relief, and don't really have any negative attributes at all. More stupidly, Disney, trying to protect the dignity of little people, has actually deprived dwarf actors of plum roles that many of them would be delighted, professionally, artistically, and financially to play. And what's weirdest about this is that the photos of the new version's magical creatures includes a dwarf. So if it's okay for one dwarf to be part of the ensemble of magical creatures, then why not all of them? And besides, it's not as if the characters aren't malleable. You can, for example, have gay relationships depicted on screen, and through their compelling characterization, make gay people more relatable and approachable to otherwise skeptical people. So with these dwarves, you had the opportunity for the talented actors working with screenwriters to reframe them apart from the 1937 original, with sharp and witty dialogue, with greater involvement, so that kids, coming out of the cinema, would have instilled within them positive associations about little people. Instead, you've got this bunch of half-baked, utterly ridiculous-looking assholes in toe-squirmingly preposterous-looking clothes prancing about like a right bunch of tits. Fuck off, Disney.
Oh, you must be grumpy.
The more I look at Hollywood today, the more it seems that the culture blew its load in one strenuous, monumental span, pulsating and blasting out spurts of hot original creativity from the 60s to the 90s, then catching its breath, face flushed and gasping, and still grinding out pangs of quality content for a decade, before the modern age of Hollywood, a disappointed gazing away into an ashen state of self-consciousness, and a reflexive grinding despite all sensation having gone, and creative instincts beginning to wane and shrivel. Empowerment, in terms of identity politics and strong female characters, has become heavily forefronted in Hollywood, but here, another schism is developing. There is an idea of empowered identity, but not agency in relations with others, that understanding, appreciating, and ultimately coming to terms with and loving who you are in a process of self-discovery and acceptance is forefronted, and weirdly, often seems to delay or even eclipse the next step in development, of romantic expression. While most of these products are aimed at a younger, even tween audience, the actresses are in their 20s, and it looks jarring when they are on PR junkets for a film, saying how the modern version of the character is cool doing her own thing, and that it's not necessarily about a boy or a man. Rachel Zegler and Halle Bailey, stars of live-action Disney reboot Snow White and the Little Mermaid, said their modern diverse versions of the iconic animated princesses are far less tethered to those age-old true love storylines. In 1937, Snow White was so focused on her finding true love, and it's not even in her mind at all in this film, Ziegler said. She's so focused in becoming the leader that her father tells her that she can be, and she's really trying to find her own agency and rule a kingdom. And maybe she finds love, maybe she finds friendship, but what's really important is that she finds her own voice. Bailey also said her Ariel isn't defined by a romantic attraction. I think she really just goes for what she wants. She's not scared, and it's not all about a boy. It's all about what she wants for herself and her life. While this seems fine on the surface, there is a morbid implication within it, that identity formulation might be hampered or stunted by relationships, that a relationship is something to be deferred, that it is a minefield of potential compromises that stands as a deterrent to the journey of self-discovery. There is also the suggestion that a woman or a girl's identity formulation is beautiful but fragile, and romantic engagement with a boy or a man is a prospect bound with problematic snares of societal bias, expectations about roles, and the subsuming of femininity into stale old ways of thinking. All of this is intended as a bracing, overdue, modern mindset for impressionable young girls. But it doesn't really bear up because entering into relationships is an essential part of identity formulation. You learn much about who you are, feel empowerment in the adoration and attentiveness of others, learn to grow when your shortcomings, blind spots, and conceited aspects are pointed out and you can work on them. Your journey of self-discovery isn't undermined or stunted when you enter into relationships. It is rocketed forward. So, with the modern mentality and these remakes on screen, you're sort of positively getting across the idea of giving breathing space to young girls to find and nurture their own identity, but also latently instilling this other idea of priggish focus on the self, and an ambiguous attitude that there's something compromising about the world of relationships. No, you don't need a man to save the day. You don't need a man before you find your own voice, and you don't need a man to fully realize yourself or make you whole. But you do need love to fully realize yourself and make you whole. And I think there are more than a handful of screenwriters who have got into a muddle about all of that. Underneath all this is a modern generational outlook, solipsism. The philosophical definition of solipsism is the idea that only one's mind is sure to exist. Solipsism holds that knowledge of anything outside one's own mind is unsure. The more general definition stemming from this is the quality of being very self-centered or selfish, often with a lack of self-awareness. For Gen Z, the world, society, even reality itself might seem at times like a bit of a battlefield, and solipsism, an internal withdrawal, could have developed as a coping mechanism or trait. But in the end, it is just that, a coping mechanism, and eventually you've got to move away from a kind of socio-cultural defensive posture and be less inclined to conflate romance, relationships, and even sex with compromise. The failure of Hollywood is that it is socially progressive, but creatively reactionary, and the schism between those two things is ever widening. It is a phony situation that doesn't feel sustainable. Eventually, something's got to give.